Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking that stack of sources you sent over, and we're diving into an emotion that, well, it feels universal, right? But it's often misunderstood.
Definitely. And it's maybe far more critical to your psychological health than just, a simple trip down memory lane.
Exactly. We are talking about nostalgia.
That's right. And our mission today really is to move past that simple kind of sepia-toned recollection, the dusty photo album view,
Yeah, get beyond that.
and truly understand the mechanics of this, well, complex state. We'll explore how intentional reflection acts as a really powerful psychological resource.
How so?
Well, strengthening identity, fueling social connection, and maybe surprisingly, helping us plan for the future.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We probably have to start with the definition, because the history of this word, nostalgia, it's almost like comically grim when you look back.
Oh, absolutely. When the Swiss physician Johannes Hofer coined the term back in 1688, it wasn't romantic at all. It was a crisis.
It was a medical diagnosis, wasn't it?
It was absolutely a medical diagnosis, and frankly, a terrifying one for military commanders at the time. The term itself, it combines the Greek words nostos, which means return home, and algos.
Which means pain.
Exactly. Pain. It was coined specifically to describe the severe, sometimes even fatal homesickness they saw in Swiss mercenaries fighting far away from the Alps.
Wow. Fatal.
Yes, and they treated it like a physical illness, not a psychological one back then.
Right, they tried to link it to physical causes.
Precisely. Doctors suggested it caused fever, wasting away, fainting. There was even one really bizarre theory that it might be linked to brain damage from the constant subtle noise of cowbells that Swiss farmers used back home. Like the sound was somehow damaging them far away.
That's wild. So the emotional pain, the yearning, was seen as manifesting physically?
So intensely, yes. And our sources mentioned the military sometimes even banned the troops from singing their traditional Swiss songs.
Really?
Yeah, because the emotional trigger was considered just too dangerous. It could apparently make the condition worse.
So it went from being this acute, potentially lethal clinical illness
Yeah.
to what we think of today. Just, a sentimental longing for the past.
Right. The modern definition is much, much gentler. It's recognized now as, well, a common, universal, and actually highly social, emotional experience.
But crucially, that original diagnosis, the algos, the pain part,
Okay.
it still points to a core truth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Nostalgia is fundamentally bittersweet.
Exactly. It's dual-natured. You feel that genuine joy, that warmth about the good times, the connection.
Yeah.
But that joy is always tinged, with a feeling of loss or sadness or just yearning for a past state that you can't get back. Or maybe sometimes a past that was already a bit idealized in the first place.
Right. And that dual nature, that's what sets up our central question for today, what we're calling the nostalgia paradox. If it contains pain and loss, how can researchers be saying it's an active psychological benefit? How can dwelling on the past, which sounds kind of counterproductive,
Yeah, it does seem that way.
how does it become this potent engine for resilience, for moving forward? That's what we want to dig into.
Okay. So, the scientific sources we looked at, they are overwhelmingly positioning nostalgia not as just passive remembering, but as an active coping mechanism. It's presented as an incredible psychological resource. Let's call it the salve.
The self. Okay. What's the mechanism behind that? What does the brain actually do when it triggers nostalgia during times of distress?
Well, it seems to act as an internal regulator. It helps manage distress, and it kind of instigates these fundamental energies aimed at realizing positive end states, getting you somewhere better.
And the benefits are broad.
Very broad and quite profound, actually, existential even. It's shown to dramatically enhance overall well-being, strengthen feelings of social connectedness, which makes sense. Most nostalgic memories involve loved ones, right?
Right. Yeah.
And critically, it increases meaning in life. It boosts self-esteem, optimism. I mean, we see hard data on this.
Like what?
Well, one source mentioned that nearly 80% or even more of American adults agree that nostalgic memories remind them of what's most important in life.
80%.
Yeah.
That's a huge consensus for something so subjective.
It really is. It suggests it acts like a powerful internal compass for many people.
I'm really fascinated by this idea. You mentioned the motivational shift it creates.
Ah, yes. This is where the coping mechanism really becomes an engine for change. Studies suggest that when you're in a negative state, say feeling lonely or maybe bored, disconnected, you're operating under what psychologists call avoidance motivation. You're basically trying to avoid bad feelings or situations.
Okay.
That negative state often triggers nostalgia, and then nostalgia acts like a bridge, activating approach
motivation.
Yeah, the drive to move toward positive goals, not just away from bad stuff, but towards good stuff.
Okay, let me see if I get this. So you feel disconnected, maybe lonely. Your brain pulls up this memory of a really great time with friends, a cherished relationship.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just make you want to retreat into the memory itself. It psychologically kind of nudges you, compels you to pursue social connection goals now in the future.
Yeah.
It drives approach, not just avoidance.
That's precisely it. Or say you feel low about your abilities. You remember a time you achieved something significant, something you were proud of.
Yeah.
That memory isn't just comforting. It acts as a psychological kickstarter. It renews your confidence, making you more likely to approach a challenging project today.
Okay, that makes sense. But
Yeah.
if it's such an incredible resource, this salve, why do so many of us associate nostalgia, at least sometimes, with sadness or melancholy? It doesn't always feel purely good.
No, it definitely doesn't. And this brings us squarely to the other side of the coin, what we can call the trap, the negative side of these reflective states.
The trap, okay.
We really have to differentiate between how nostalgia is often studied, say, in a laboratory setting, versus how it's actually experienced day to day in real life.
That's the difference there.
Well, in lab studies, researchers often ask participants to recall their most cherished memories, their absolute highlights. And naturally, that tends to make the recalled experience predominantly positive.
Right, you're asking for the best stuff.
Exactly. But studies that look at daily or momentary nostalgia using things like real-time diaries or experience sampling, they show a very different picture. It's much more ambivalent.
So what's the reality check from those daily experiences?
In daily life, nostalgia is actually often strongly and consistently associated with negative affect. Feelings like being depressed, sad, maybe anxious.
Really? Strongly associated?
Yes. The data shows that nostalgia is frequently, maybe even primarily, triggered by existing negative psychological states. Things like profound loneliness, a sense of meaninglessness, boredom, or maybe reacting to recent negative social events or failures.
So wait, it's not always just this pleasant memory we drift into. It's often a signal that something's wrong, that the brain is urgently trying to cope with existing distress.
That seems to be a major part of it, yes. In the sort of trenches of everyday coping, nostalgia is often deployed by the brain when it's already dealing with distress. It's like a flag saying, hey, something's off here, and the brain is searching its toolkit for an emotional solution.
Okay, so it's not always the warm, fuzzy feeling itself. Sometimes it's the brain reaching for the warm, fuzzy feeling because things feel bad.
That's a good way to put it. And this leads to a really crucial distinction the researchers make. The difference between reflective and restorative nostalgia.
Reflective versus restorative.
Active nostalgia. This is where the trap can lie. This is the kind of constant dwelling, the excessive longing for a past that, well, it just doesn't exist anymore. And this often makes the present feel less vibrant, less fulfilling by comparison. It can lead to persistent sadness, anxiety, maybe even an emotional detachment from reality. It stops you from growing because you're always looking back.
It sounds like the psychological equivalent of constantly looking in the rearview mirror instead of focusing on the road ahead.
That's a perfect analogy. You can't drive forward effectively like that.
So what's the other kind? Restorative?
Restorative nostalgia. This is positioned as the healthier cousin. This form doesn't just look back. It maintains hope and excitement for the future.
How does it do that?
It acts as that engine we talked about because it affirms that positive states, joy, connection, meaning they've been achieved before, and therefore, crucially, they can be achieved again.
Ah, okay. So it's not about retreating to the past. It's about pulling the strengths from the past into the present.
Yeah.
To power the future.
Exactly. It leverages the past as evidence for future possibility.
Now, we have to complicate this even further, right? Because the very memories fueling this engine, whether it's reflective or restorative, they're often not accurate recordings of the past anyway.
Oh, absolutely not. Memory is notoriously unreliable in that sense. Which brings us to the distortion effect known as rosy retrospection.
Rosy retrospection. A classic, right? We remember the good old days as being better than they actually were.
Pretty much. It's the common memory bias where people tend to recall the positive emotions associated with past events as stronger, maybe more intense, or more frequent than they actually reported feeling at the time.
I remember the sources mentioned a vacation study example. That seemed really clear.
Yes, that study is highly illustrative. Researchers tracked people while they were actually on vacation getting real-time emotion ratings.
Okay.
Then they compared those ratings to what the same people predicted they'd feel before the trip and what they recalled feeling after the trip.
And what did they find?
Consistently, people recalled and predicted their positive emotions, happiness, excitement, as being significantly stronger than what they actually reported feeling while they were there. You know, dealing with the travel stress, maybe lost luggage, bad weather.
The mundane reality of it.
Exactly. We seem to selectively filter out the neutral, the mundane, the stressful bits when we reconstruct the memory later.
So we plan future trips, maybe spend a lot of money, make big life decisions based on this curated, often exaggerated memory of how happy we were on the last one.
That's what the study suggested. The only significant predictor of whether subjects wanted to repeat that same holiday was their recalled positive emotion, not what they actually felt moment to moment at the time.
Wow. That creates kind of self-reinforcing cycle of planning based on an idealized past.
It certainly can, but here's an interesting twist from some of the other research. It's not just a positive bias. Other studies show evidence for what you might call the blue view, an exaggeration of negative emotions upon recollection, too.
So it's not just rosy, it can be extra blue as well. We remember the bad times as being worse than they were.
It seems that way sometimes. The idea emerging is that memory biases might tend to magnify the stronger peak emotional experiences, whether they were positive or negative.
Ah, the peaks get amplified.
Right, while the average, more neutral moments just fade away much more quickly. So nostalgia, when it kicks in, is operating on this kind of highlights reel of our life, the really good bits and maybe the really bad bits too, just intensified.
And now, this inherent bias, this curation of memory, is arguably being amplified, maybe even weaponized, by technology.
Yes, the consequences of curated memory, especially in the digital sphere, are something researchers are really starting to grapple with.
How so?
Well, digital platforms are actively contributing to this curation process. Think about things like Facebook Memories or Instagram's year in review type features.
Yeah, they pop up all the time.
Right. And the algorithms behind these often highlight moments based on engagement. The photos with the most likes, the posts with the most comments. They tend to show you the best, most socially validated moments.
And this is where external validation starts messing with our internal memory structure.
That's the concern. Memories that received more likes, more positive comments, might begin to feel more significant, more real, more central to your story than other moments that didn't get that external reinforcement.
So the algorithm is subtly, or maybe not so subtly, dictating which parts of our past are deemed worthy of being part of our current identity narrative.
That's the potential danger, yes. This active filtering, often favoring the positive and socially approved, can lead towards a kind of false reality.
How so?
Where the neutral, the difficult, maybe the less flattering memories, the ones that didn't get high engagement online, get subconsciously edited out or downplayed. Users might end up developing a curated self-identity based more on this selective, algorithmically reinforced online history rather than their genuine, complex, lived history.
Which could make falling into that reflective nostalgia trap, where the present always feels lacking compared to a perfect-looking past, much, much easier.
Exactly. The curated past looks impossibly good.
Okay, so to really appreciate the power of these memories, both the good and the potentially distorted, we need to understand what's happening inside our heads, the physical mechanics.
Right. When you feel that really visceral pull of nostalgia, your brain is quite literally running its own kind of time machine.
We're talking about the neural circuitry of self-projection here. How does the brain differentiate between just, say, recalling a fact about your past and truly re-experiencing it, which seems key to nostalgia?
Well, self-projection, that mental re-experiencing which is core to nostalgia, is strongly linked to activity in a specific brain area, the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC.
The MPFC, okay.
But what's really fascinating is that fMRI studies reveal a functional dissociation within this area. It does different things depending on the task.
Can you break down that dissociation simply for us?
Sure. When you engage in genuine nostalgia, re-experiencing a memory that's highly relevant to you, your personal past, the ventral MPFC, is recruited. That's the VMPFC.
Okay, ventra.
Bottom part. Right. This area is key for self-relevant inferences, for projecting yourself back into your personal past. And it's tightly connected to the medial temporal lobe network, the system heavily involved in basic memory processes.
So the ventral MPSC lights up when the memory is really about me and my specific feelings and experiences back then. What about the other part?
The dorsal MPFC, the upper part, gets recruited more when you're thinking about someone else's perspective or inferring their mental state, maybe projecting into their past.
Ah, interesting. So the brain literally uses slightly different circuits for thinking about my past versus someone else's.
Exactly. And that separation really underscores that nostalgia is, neurologically speaking, an intensely self-centered process. It seems designed to integrate memories into your ongoing sense of self, reinforce your identity.
And what role does the hippocampus play in all this? We always hear about the hippocampus and memory.
Oh, the hippocampus is absolutely crucial. It's highly active during any kind of autobiographical recall, including nostalgia. Researchers are particularly focused on it because there's speculation
Yeah.
that the psychological health benefits of nostalgia, things like decreased stress, increased well-being that we talked about, might actually derive, at least in part, from real, tangible neural changes occurring in the hippocampus during the act of nostalgizing.
Wow. So engaging in positive nostalgic reflection might actually be physiologically changing our brains, making us better at regulating stress. How might that even work?
Well, the exact mechanisms are still being worked out. It's complex, but we know the hippocampus plays a major role in regulating the body's stress response system, the HPA axis.
Right, the cortisol system.
Exactly. The theory is that when you recall positive, meaningful, socially connected memories, you might be creating a state of greater neural coherence. This could potentially help downregulate the production of stress hormones like cortisol. It's almost like nostalgia might be teaching the hippocampus to better integrate stressful experiences within a broader, coherent, and ultimately meaningful narrative of the self.
That's incredible. It's using the past, quite literally, to tune the brain's present-day stress response.
It's a compelling idea.
Now, this mental time travel, this re-experiencing, it doesn't always require deliberate effort, does it? Sometimes it's just triggered instantly, out of the blue, by a specific sensory cue.
Ah, yes, the famous Proustian memory effect.
Somatologist.
Exactly. The classic example of involuntary memory. Marcel Proust's protagonist is just overwhelmed by this flood of long-forgotten childhood memories, triggered simply by the taste and smell of a tea-soaked Madeleine cookie. These memories bypass the slow, deliberate search process. They just hit you.
Why do certain senses, particularly smell and maybe music, seem to have this kind of express lane to our past?
Well, smell-odor-evoked memory is particularly potent because the olfactory bulb, where smell is processed, has incredibly direct connections to the limbic system.
The emotional part of the brain.
Right,
Yeah.
particularly the amygdala, which handles emotion, and the hippocampus for
Yeah.
memory. It bypasses some of the higher-level processing that other senses go through. This direct route might explain why smell-linked memories often feel so intensely emotional and immediate.
We see this clinically too, right, with trauma.
Definitely. Intrusive trauma-related involuntary memories often include a very strong sensory component, a specific sight, sound, or smell that acts as a hotspot, instantly triggering a re-experiencing of the traumatic event.
But interestingly, our sources suggested that even more than smell, music might be the most dominant trigger for autobiographical memories overall.
Yes, the research comparing different triggers seems to put music at the top. Studies found music evoked significantly more autobiographical memories than, say, food cues involving smell and taste.
And that held true for both young and older adults.
It did. And music also triggered more involuntary memories in general. Plus, critically, the memories evoked by music were often rated by people as being more important to their overall life story, more central to who they are.
Why the dominance of music? Is it because music gets so tangled up with our identity, especially when we're young?
That seems to be the leading theory. Music preference is just intrinsically linked to identity, our personalities, our social groups, even things like political leanings sometimes. And particularly the music we listen to during what psychologists call the reminiscence bump, that period of intense identity formation, usually adolescence and early adulthood.
Yeah, the teenage years, early 20s.
Right. Music from that time seems to be encoded with exceptional clarity and emotional weight throughout our lives. So hearing those songs again isn't just remembering an event. It's like remembering who you were when your sense of self was really taking shape. It taps right back into that formative period.
Before we move on from the brain stuff, I want to revisit that really fascinating speculation you mentioned earlier about why the feeling fades. That intense, visceral feeling of nostalgia, it often vanishes really quickly, right? It's like a brief shock. Then it's gone.
Yes, it's a very elegant, though still theoretical explanation. The idea is when you access one of these deep, emotional, maybe sensory-rich memories, your brain momentarily kind of projects your consciousness back to that state. For a split second, it feels incredibly real, like you're there. But the brain, as a system fundamentally built for navigating the present moment for survival and coherence, quickly recognizes the incongruity. This past state doesn't match the current reality input.
So it corrects itself.
Exactly. It corrects the experience, essentially overwriting that fleeting immersion in your past state of being with your current state, your current reality. And that neurological correction, that snapback, is what might cause that intense, sometimes jarring feeling of being ripped back to the present.
And that's why the feeling dissipates so rapidly. The brain's prioritizing the now over the then.
Precisely. It needs to keep you grounded in the present reality, even while using the past as a resource.
Okay, that makes sense. And the fact that the brain does prioritize the present is really the key to understanding how nostalgia functions as this self-shaping psychological tool we're discussing.
Absolutely. Its primary job, evolutionarily or psychologically speaking, probably isn't to hold us hostage to the past, but to use the past to strengthen us for the future.
So how does it do that? One of the key functions mentioned is affirming the intrinsic self. What does that mean?
Right. Nostalgia tends to revolve around the self, our close social connections, and personally meaningful life events. This makes it a really powerful tool for bolstering what's called self-continuity.
Self-continuity. Just feeling like the me today is connected to the me from yesterday.
Essentially, yes. That sense of a coherent, continuous self across time. But it's maybe deeper than just connection. The research suggests nostalgia offers a kind of window to the intrinsic self.
The true self.
Kind of. The self deep down, maybe the one less burdened by current stresses or external expectations. And nostalgia becomes particularly appealing, the sources suggest, when people feel disconnected or confused about that intrinsic self.
When might that happen?
Maybe during major life transitions, graduating, changing careers, becoming a parent, or perhaps when you feel unable to express your true self in your current life, maybe due to social pressure or demanding circumstances.
So if you're feeling lost or like you're just playing a role to meet expectations.
Right. Maybe trying to live up to someone else's definition of success.
Revisiting a memory of a time you felt authentically joyful or connected or capable can cut through that external noise.
That's exactly the idea. When people engage in nostalgic reflection, studies show they are more likely to focus on these authentic self-attributes, what really matters to them. And importantly, they tend to become less concerned with meeting extrinsic standards of value.
Extrinsic standards, like what?
Things like income, status, physical appearance, superficial social approval. Those external measures of self-worth tend to fade in importance when you're connected to that intrinsic, nostalgically accessed self. It re-anchors you to your core values.
And nowhere does this anchoring seem more critical, based on the sources, than in coping with loneliness and social disconnection.
Absolutely. Chronic loneliness is often associated with deficits in social confidence, and that leads to reduced motivation to even pursue social goals. It's a tough cycle.
How does nostalgia break that cycle?
It acts as a kind of antidote. By revisiting cherished memories, which are very often highly social in nature, involving friends, family, loved ones, nostalgia seems to strengthen a person's perception of their own social confidence, their ability to connect.
So the memory itself doesn't just feel good. It actually changes your cognitive assessment of your own social competence here and now.
That's what the research suggests. And this boost in perceived confidence then feeds directly back into that approach motivation we discussed earlier.
Oh, okay.
Engaging in nostalgic reverie, especially about positive social experiences, energizes approach-oriented social goals. It makes lonely individuals more motivated to try and establish new bonds, deepen existing ones, or maybe repair relationships.
So it moves them from an avoidance mindset, I'm lonely, I should withdraw, to a growth and intimacy mindset. I've had good connections, I can seek them out again.
Precisely. And one source specifically noted that this positive link between nostalgia and social confidence is especially strong for lonely individuals. It seems to help reduce that chronic social confidence deficit they often experience compared to lonely people who don't report strong nostalgic feelings.
Okay, so we've seen it regulate mood, boost confidence, reaffirm the self.
Yeah.
This really positions nostalgia not just as self-soothing, but as an active agent of behavioral change.
Yes, especially when dealing with entrenched, often unhealthy behaviors.
How does that work? What triggers it in that context?
It often seems to be triggered by a sense of self-discontinuity, a feeling of being profoundly disconnected from a past self that was perceived as healthier or more stable or maybe just happier. This is often seen in contexts like addiction recovery or trying to break chronic unhealthy habits.
So someone struggling with addiction might feel very far removed from the person they were before the addiction took hold.
Exactly, and they might intentionally use nostalgia as a tool. They'll deliberately nostalgize about that time when they were healthier, focusing on the non-addicted self, for instance.
And how does that memory translate into sustained action, into change?
They mentally contrast that positive, perhaps idealized past life, the life of the non-addicted self, with the stress, the problems, the negativity of their current life, dominated by the unhealthy behavior. This positive contrast, fueled by the approach motivation that nostalgia sparks, is then directed squarely towards behavioral change. The goal becomes reclaiming that past better self.
That sounds like a potentially powerful therapeutic framework, using the past self as motivation for the future self.
It can be, but like all powerful tools, there's a serious pitfall here we absolutely have to address.
Okay, what's the danger?
The danger is substantial. Nostalgia can actively undermine healthy behavior change if the focus of the reflection shifts. If it's not about reclaiming the healthy self, but about reclaiming the perceived benefits associated with the unhealthy behavior itself.
Can you give an example?
Yes, the sources mention research involving women who had stopped smoking after childbirth. Some reported intense nostalgia for smoking.
They weren't missing the nicotine specifically. What were they actually nostalgic for?
It wasn't just the nicotine. They explained that smoking was linked to their old self, their identity before motherhood. It represented freedom from demanding responsibilities, maybe a sense of autonomy, or simply designated me time.
Ah, so the nostalgia wasn't for the cigarettes, but for the life state the cigarettes symbolized.
Precisely. And the research showed similar things with nostalgia for, say, traditional high-calorie comfort foods, contributing to maintaining unhealthy eating habits. The memory isn't just of the food, but of what that food represented emotionally. Maybe family connection, comfort, cultural belonging.
So if you nostalgize the feeling, the freedom, the comfort, the identity, you might inadvertently be motivating yourself to return to the harmful behavior that you associate with that feeling.
Exactly. It's crucial what aspect of the past you're focusing your nostalgic energy on. Reclaiming the healthy self, good. Reclaiming the symbolic freedom represented by the addiction, potentially very counterproductive.
Okay, that's a really important nuance. Now let's shift gears slightly. We've mostly talked about personal nostalgia, but what happens when this feeling goes collective?
Ah, yes. When we shift from personal memory to collective memory, the mechanics of nostalgia really scale up, and they can act as a powerful form of social glue.
So collective nostalgia, that's like a group-level emotion, right? A sentimental longing for a past that the group feels it shares, or maybe just imagines sharing.
Exactly. And this shared feeling, the shared narrative about the past, can significantly strengthen solidarity, trust, and cohesion within that group. It helps create a unified social identity.
Fostering togetherness, community spirit, that kind of thing.
Right. But one of the interesting points raised in the sources is that in our contemporary world, that kind of naturally occurring shared cultural experience that used to fuel collective nostalgia might be, well, under threat.
The fragmentation.
Exactly. Fragmentation due to streaming services, personalized social media feeds, on-demand, everything. It's diminished the frequency of those truly simultaneously shared cultural moments.
We've kind of lost those universal water cooler conversations, haven't we? Where almost everyone at the same time was reacting to the finale of M at H, or maybe the Who Shot JR cliffhanger, or a major historical event unfolding live.
Precisely. That loss eliminates a kind of unified cultural touchstone, a common language for a whole generation or society.
And this is why sometimes media companies deliberately reintroduce constraints to artificially create that cohesion again.
That seems to be part of the strategy. Our sources pointed to the success, for example, of the weekly release schedules for shows like the early seasons of The Mandalorian.
Right. Instead of dropping the whole season at once, they made people wait each week.
Exactly. And that weekly constraint, even though the delivery method was modern streaming, it recreated a sense of shared experience and anticipation. It fostered conversation.
It created a perfect storm of shared conversation, as one source put it.
Yes, particularly maybe among younger audiences who perhaps didn't have the same immediate unfettered online access to discuss spoilers instantly. It kind of restored that Monday morning chatter, counteracting the usual fragmentation of binge watching.
And this taps into something deeper, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Preference for experiencing things together.
It seems so. It taps into this concept called synchronized scheduling.
Synchronized scheduling.
Yeah, it's the psychological preference many people have for experiencing events simultaneously with others, even when doing so might be personally inconvenient or less efficient than consuming it on their own time.
Why do we like that?
It seems to act as essential social glue. It counteracts feelings of disconnection, both experienced and even anticipated. That psychological urge to be in sync with the group, even if only virtually, reinforces our sense of belonging.
Okay. Now that powerful social glue aspect of collective nostalgia,
Yeah.
it's obviously something that can be and often is leveraged in the political sphere, sometimes quite powerfully.
Oh, absolutely. It's a profound narrative tool used by political leaders and movements. Framing a particular past era as a romanticized golden age is a classic technique.
What's the goal there usually?
Often it's used to promote identity closure, a more rigid, maybe exclusionary definition of who we are as a group. And it's frequently deployed to implicitly or explicitly reject globalized perspectives or progressive social change by holding up a selective, idealized version of national or group history as superior.
What kind of underlying distress tends to trigger this potent collective yearning for a past era? The sources suggested it's not always just about economic hardship.
That's a really crucial distinction the research makes. While economic anxiety can play a role, studies focusing on collective nostalgia in communities that feel marginalized or left behind suggest it's often predicted more strongly by subjective sociocultural experiences.
Like what?
Feelings of disconnectedness from the mainstream culture, feelings of relative deprivation, which isn't just being poor, but feeling like your group is being cheated out of the status or respect it rightfully deserves culturally or socially, and feelings of powerlessness to influence the direction of society.
So it's less about the bank balance and more about a deep internalized sense of losing status, losing control over the cultural narrative, feeling like your group's values are being eroded.
That seems to be a major driver, yes. And when this collective longing takes a restorative turn, aiming not just to feel good about the past, but to actively reestablish a lost, idealized past, that's when it can potentially devolve into something the sources termed retrotopia.
Retrotopia. That sounds ominous. This is the dangerous side of collective nostalgia.
It's presented as potentially very destructive, yes. Because retrotopia doesn't just fondly remember the past. It often proposes rigid, sometimes completely invented traditions. It selectively memorizes or grossly misrepresents the past to justify often extreme actions in the present.
How does it misrepresent the past?
Well, it might romanticize a specific historical era, say the 1950s in America, as a time of perfect harmony and shared values, while conveniently erasing or ignoring all the historical realities like deep-seated racial segregation, systemic sexism, limited social mobility for many groups.
Right. It creates an impossible, sanitized ideal.
Exactly. And the purpose of creating that impossible ideal is often to justify drastic actions against perceived threatening future actions that might involve nationalism, xenophobia, rejecting outsiders, enforcing rigid social norms, essentially promoting identity closure against perceived threats.
One source made a stark point about this.
Yes, that you'd be hard-pressed to find many individuals from historically marginalized groups who actually hold fond nostalgic memories for those same past eras that are often romanticized by politically motivated collective nostalgia. Their lived experience was vastly different.
That perfectly illustrates how this selective memory, used as a social glue for one group, can simultaneously create deep exclusion and division for others.
It absolutely can.
And bringing it back to the individual level for a moment, the digital landscape we talked about earlier seems to be accelerating and magnifying all these issues around memory, curation, and identity.
It really does seem to be. Digital nostalgia is increasingly becoming algorithmically driven. Platforms like Facebook or Google Photos actively resurface moments for you.
Right. On this day.
Exactly. And that fundamentally shifts nostalgia from being primarily about what we choose to remember based on our internal state to being heavily influenced by what algorithms choose to remind us of, often based on maximizing engagement, not necessarily psychological well-being.
And this AI-driven curation, highlighting the best moments, the most liked photos. We touched on how that affects our internal memories. How does it play out commercially?
Well, it feeds directly into what's known as golden age marketing.
Golden age marketing.
Yeah, brands use nostalgia often very effectively to sell products and further consumption. They do this by promoting past decades as these idealized, seemingly worry-free eras.
Like how the 80s or 90s are often portrayed in ads now.
Precisely. They might distill the 90s down to, say, Tamagotchis, neon windbreakers, maybe a specific sitcom theme song, while completely ignoring the context, like the economic recessions, the political instability, the social issues of that actual time.
So they distort history to create this marketable, anxiety-free feeling.
Yes, creating a product or associating their brand with that feeling. It capitalizes on our collective need for comfort, for social glue, for a sense of security, often by presenting a past that never quite existed in that simplified form.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've seen nostalgia as this complex emotion, a potential salve, but also a potential trap, a neurological process, a shaper of self, a form of social glue, and something influenced by technology and politics. What does this all mean for you, the listener, practically?
Right. We've established it's a regulatory mechanism, a social binder, a powerful tool, but one that definitely cuts both ways. So how do we consciously shift it? How do we move it from being just a passive comfort, maybe sometimes a source of sadness, into an active tool for well-being and resilience?
Where do we start?
Well, first, I think we need to fundamentally reframe how we view the temporal focus of nostalgia itself. The research strongly suggests it's not really past-focused in its function.
It's future-oriented, even though it's about the past.
Exactly. It seems fundamentally future-oriented. While yes, it reflects on the past, its primary psychological function appears to be motivating affective states, behaviors, and goals that actually improve people's future lives.
How? By increasing optimism, inspiration.
Yes. Increasing optimism, inspiration, motivation, social connection goals, all things geared towards a better future state.
The sources also mentioned that the brain systems involved are linked, right? The capacity to re-experience the past episodic memory and the capacity to imagine the future episodic simulation or prospection.
Precisely. They share a common neural basis. Our brain uses overlapping regions for both remembering the past and simulating possible futures. This strongly confirms that our past memories aren't just sitting there like files in a cabinet.
They're more like raw material.
Exactly. Raw material that the brain uses to plot a coherent, motivated course for the future. It's mental time travel, but the aim seems to be accelerating progress, not facilitating retreat.
Okay, so let's get practical then. If we want to harness this future-oriented power, how can we engage in intentional nostalgia to maximize the benefits and, crucially, avoid falling into that unproductive reflective trap?
Right. You can deliberately make nostalgia a therapeutic resource. The key seems to be ensuring that the memory retrieval leads to some kind of creative or social action in the present.
Like what?
Well, things like consciously creating specific nostalgic music playlists that lift your mood or remind you of your strengths, or intentionally building photo albums, physical or digital, that focus on cherished social memories and positive experiences. Maybe incorporating important symbols or themes from your past into artistic or creative activities you do now. Even planning small trips or dinners that involve revisiting special places or preparing traditional dishes that generate positive, maybe communal nostalgia.
So the key is tethering the past feeling to a present action or creation, not just passively consuming the memory.
That seems to be crucial for harnessing the restorative aspect, yes, linking it to present agency.
Okay, and what if we recognize we are falling into that unproductive past dwelling? That reflective nostalgia where the past just seems so much better and the present feels kind of gray and insufficient by comparison. How do we break that cycle?
The sources suggest two core behavioral strategies here are particularly helpful: acceptance and mindfulness.
Acceptance and mindfulness. Yeah, how does acceptance work in this context?
Acceptance means acknowledging the difficult feelings that often accompany that kind of past dwelling, the sadness, the regret, the longing, without judgment, instead of beating yourself up for ruminating.
Yeah, which is easy to do.
Right. You'd instead try to notice and label the thought and feeling non-judgmentally. Something like, okay, I notice I'm thinking about how I messed up that past opportunity and I feel regretful right now. Then, importantly, you try to treat yourself with kindness, acknowledging the feeling. This is a difficult feeling. It's human to feel this way. It shows I care.
So you kind of Disarm the ruminative thought by observing it and labeling it, separating it a bit from your core identity, and meeting it with compassion instead of criticism.
Exactly. It takes the fuel away from the negative spiral. And then mindfulness is the anchor.
How does mindfulness help break the cycle?
Mindfulness acts as the anchor to the present. It breaks the cycle of rumination by deliberately forcing your attention onto fully savoring or engaging with something happening right now.
Like what kind of things?
Could be anything, really. Listening intently to a piece of music, focusing completely on the taste and texture of a snack, engaging fully in deep breathing exercises, or noticing the physical sensations during a walk or other exercise.
And the idea is that it's hard to be lost in the past and fully present simultaneously.
Right. It's cognitively and emotionally difficult to be intensely worried about the past and fully connected sensorially to the present moment at the same time. Mindfulness essentially demands that the brain prioritize the now, interrupting the grip of the past rumination.
That makes sense. Finally, the research seems to be pushing beyond just individual strategies and looking into actual therapeutic interventions. Can we systematically target this process?
We're starting to. The longitudinal studies show something really important here, the importance of fit.
Fit, meaning it doesn't work the same for everyone.
Exactly. Weekly nostalgic reflection interventions were found to be consistently beneficial long-term only for individuals who are already naturally high in what's called dispositional nostalgia, people who are just naturally prone to feeling it and engaging with it constructively.
And for people low in that disposition,
Yeah.
who aren't naturally nostalgic.
For them, prolonged, forced nostalgic intervention could potentially even be adverse. It might just make them feel worse or more disconnected.
Wow. Okay, so it's not a one-size-fits-all cure.
Definitely not. And this really highlights that if someone is struggling with excessive, unproductive past dwelling, a targeted professional therapeutic context is probably vital. Therapy can help individuals safely process unresolved emotions connected to the past, ensuring that any reflective work is actually constructive and not just reinforcing the negative patterns.
And looking even further ahead, how is technology potentially contributing to the future of nostalgia-based interventions? Not just causing problems, but maybe helping.
Well, there's some fascinating, albeit early stage, work being done with things like virtual reality, VR, and exploring what are called liminal spaces.
Liminal spaces, like thresholds.
Exactly. Spaces of transition, thresholds in between states. VR is being explored as a tool to systematically elicit future-oriented nostalgia.
Nostalgia for the future. How does that work?
It sounds paradoxical, right? But they're exploring anticipatory and anticipated variants. They try to achieve this in VR by carefully blending two key variables: familiarity, using maybe cultural cues or personalized elements that feel known and safe with ambiguity, including open-ended elements that allow for projection and possibility.
What's the goal of creating that kind of space?
The idea is to create a safe, suspended, experiential frame where an individual can practice imagining a positive future, a future where maybe their present struggles have been overcome and have themselves become part of a positive, coherent life story, something they might one day look back on with a kind of constructive nostalgia. It's aimed at supporting self-reconstruction and mood regulation by simulating positive future possibilities.
That takes us right back to the beginning in a way. We started with nostalgia being defined by pain for a lost past, a clinical diagnosis even. But we end with exploring it as a potential technology for actively envisioning and improving the future while helping manage our present.
Absolutely. I think we've really established that nostalgia is far more than just simple sentimental recollection. It's a crucial regulatory mechanism for our brains. It's a binder of social identity. And it's a profound coping tool that, when used well, allows us to integrate our history to build coherence and motivation moving forward.
So the core takeaway here for you, the listener, seems to be that the real power of nostalgia doesn't lie in retreating to the past. It lies in learning how to leverage a positively curated or perhaps realistically integrated past to actively construct a more confident, motivated, and socially connected future.
Well said. And maybe a final thought to leave people with. If nostalgia truly can be an emotional engine that moves us forward, what positive memory from your past could you intentionally revisit today? Not just to passively relive it, but to actively use it to fuel your very next steps toward a meaningful goal.
That's a deep thought to end on indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.